Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host Manny Maradiege, today live on April 17th with another episode to talk around news stories and topics that have been circling around the NFL. Starting off today with the Giants quarterback, Daniel Jones. We're going to get into him and what he said earlier in this week with spring practices going on. He commented on his rehab and his situation with the Giants. We're going to get into that. Then later on, we're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers. They have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. So what sort of strategy, what can they do with those picks going forward with just a little bit over a week left to go until the NFL draft? We're going to talk about what they're looking at with those picks before wrapping it all up with more on Deion Sanders and the college scene, what he said specifically about NFL teams and them allegedly putting out bad information that hurts the draft stocks of certain players in the draft. He sounds off on it, gives some reasons, and just some talk about that. That's coming towards the end of the show. And before I jump into the first segment, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, as I always remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments during today's show, use the tip and donations link on your screen right now, gsmcpodcast.net. With any of those, using that link makes me able to read your question out loud. Once it pops up in my chat box, we can use that, carry the conversation elsewhere, and make it just more engaging. I think it's more fun this way. It's a big help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, if you could use the tip and donations link with any of your questions at gsmcpodcast.net. But like I mentioned to start the show, we're going to talk about Daniel Jones. I've mentioned just last show talking about the Giants on the defensive side of the ball. Now we focus back again, circle back again to the offense, and the main thing is Daniel Jones, the quarterback, just like on any team. The spring practices started on Monday, and Brian Daboll, Daniel Jones were there for day one. They both met with the social media reporters, anybody else there that was asking questions. Daboll went first, virtually giving an interview with some social media members there, and they asked him about Daniel Jones, where he's at, how he's seen him up to this point, and he said, "It's day one of phase 1. I'd say he's making progress. I don't want to say further, ahead, or behind. He's doing everything we need him to do, hitting it head on, and he's making strides." That's what Brian Daboll said on Daniel Jones' ACL recovery. That was his latest injury this past season. He also dealt with a neck injury, and then came the ACL injury that ultimately ended his season. And that's really where the conversation starts with the whole quarterback situation, where this offense is going in the future. Everybody knows that the quarterback is the biggest position, the most important position. So that being so, the Giants now have the 6th overall pick, and just like a few years ago when Daniel Jones was drafted, ironically with the 6th pick, they find themselves in another situation where there's been a lot of talks with them around drafting a quarterback, people not being so sure, confident in Daniel Jones because the play on the field hasn't been great, but you could also say that that has to do a lot with who's around him. Have they really supported him, surrounded him with the necessary talent that he needs to succeed? That's a question. I think it's a very valid question. And also there's the injury history, the just all the neck injuries, the ACL injuries, the ball security problems that he had early in his career. All of that wrapped into one to get to where we are now at this point where Daniel Jones, there are some people that back him while others would like to see a quarterback get drafted. It is tough at number 6 because of where they sit. All the talk has been Caleb 1. The Commanders are sure to draft 1. The Patriots are in a situation where they can, but there's also been trade talks around them. Then you have the Cardinals, again, another trade up spot where teams are looking into to try and move up. Teams like the Broncos, Raiders, the Vikings, all, I'm sure, are communicating with the Cardinals around that situation. Then just a pick in front of them, number 5, the Chargers. Yeah, you could technically trade up, but also, is there going to be any quarterback left there at 5, in all honesty, that you would want to draft? So realistically, the Giants are looking, if they were to make a quarterback selection, I don't think they can stay put at 6. And then at that point, do you give up more to go get a quarterback, even though you still don't really have the pieces around him to be successful, have a number 1 option? The O-line is still shaky. There's still a lot of questions left, and to draft another quarterback, I think would just raise more questions, in all honesty, rather than sticking with Daniel Jones, which I probably anticipate them doing. It might not be the most popular suggestion option at this point, but I think long-term it'll probably work out better for them. And Daniel Jones was actually asked about this, the Giants' interest in the number 6 overall pick, and on just that and how he views that, what his thoughts are on that. He said, "I think I can get into trouble when you try to think too much about some of the things and how it all works out. I'm just focused on what I'm doing, and that's my rehab, getting healthy, spending time with the guys, and making sure we're all on the same page." That's what he said in terms of the quarterback interest from the Giants, allegedly. And that brings up the contract as well. You look at the latest contract Daniel Jones got with the Giants recently, that 4-year, $160 million deal that they gave him. And, 4-year, $160 million. Just a season ago now, last offseason, that was a big talking point, just because, you had Saquon on the team. Now he obviously moves on, and you're stuck with Daniel Jones, and everyone, again, relating back to the quarterback, drafting one, is second-guessing now. Everyone, even in the organization, it seems, with reports and sources coming out from the Giants, that people just within the organization are second-guessing that decision, handing Daniel Jones that massive contract. And it looks like it handcuffed the Giants at the moment. You're thinking, wow, like 4 years, $160 million. How could you not just write it out without having an enormous amount of dead cap money? Well, it's a critical year now, bringing that all up, and the way the contract was structured this year proves to be a lot more important than I think a lot of people actually know, because the New York Giants can actually move on from his contract because of an out that's in the deal, an opt-out option, if you will, that's included in that deal, which would minimize the dead cap hit if they decided to use it after this year. So, it's 4 years. Technically there would be 3 more years, or actually 2 more years after this season coming up. But because of that opt-out option that is in the contract, the Giants don't necessarily have to be handcuffed to Daniel Jones for another 2.5 years, or another year at least. They have that option. There will still be dead cap money, but at least it won't be as much as it would if you just opted out or just decided to move on from him while he's still under contract. So that alleviates a little bit of that pressure and a little bit of the just consequences the Giants could face if they just hit the red panic button and move on. There is a little bit of hope there for them if, and I say if again because they might not want to move on from him. Say they draft a wide receiver, say they feel that Daniel Jones hasn't really been given a fair chance, and they go with him. They decide to put their trust in him this year, get him a number 1 receiver, maybe make some more moves in free agency, and he looks a little bit decent. He looked great. Not this past season, the year before with Saquon, when they went to the playoffs, when they beat the Vikings on the road. That just doesn't really happen out of nowhere, out of thin air. It was the first year. Everyone's feeling good about it. The second year didn't turn out great, but they have an opportunity now to support Daniel Jones and really limit and eliminate all the excuses there are, which is the ultimate point. Up till now, like I mentioned, people could defend him and say they didn't have the weapons, the O-line, the support around him. It all wasn't looking great. Now you get him a receiver, and like I mentioned, add some other pieces, maybe in free agency. It could look a little bit better, and then after, if it's still bad, if it's still not looking how you want it to, at least you know for sure now what you have in Daniel Jones in this offense, and you can know if you desperately need to move on. He has been dealing with injuries as well, so that's another thing. If he could stay healthy, that'll help his case. Leading up to this year, on top of the ACL, which caused them to miss the rest of the season, Daniel Jones missed 3 games with a neck injury earlier in the year. And he said, just quickly on that, he said his neck is feeling 100%. It was just more of a stinger type of injury with his neck, pretty common in football, and it all feels great from that standpoint from him. So that's a good thing for him as he continues to recover from his ACL injury. And when he decides to come back, or when he's able to come back, I should say, I think he was targeting the start of training camp or around there. So that's a month or 2 away. That's something to look out for, and trying to see where he is from that standpoint. They're only just at the beginning of this thing. And there is a lot of talk right now, and just to sum it up all in a sort of decisive sort of way, if you're the Giants, when do you sort of make that decision to use or to move on from Daniel Jones? Use that opt-out option like I mentioned. It'll be interesting to see how it develops over the season. I'm sure that sort of decision happens midway, at least at the earliest, for the New York Giants, or maybe even earlier. But if you decide to go that, you have to be sure of it, and you have to have some sort of plan if you do decide to opt out after this year, what your options are. I'm not saying it could lead to tanking, to trying to find another avenue that way to ensure you get a better quarterback, but that sort of decision, just thinking about this whole issue with Daniel Jones, that's something I thought was interesting, just thinking about when the Giants make that determination of, all right, it's not working out, we're just going to move on. At what point during the season is that going to come? That's going to be something to look out for. And again, if they still get a receiver and the offense isn't still ideal, because I don't think it will be, even if they get Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison or somebody like that, it still wouldn't be ideal. And then is it fair to still judge Daniel Jones with not the best situation? It's better, but it's not great. Is it fair to judge him off of that? It might not be, in all honesty, but, you know, the Giants, quite frankly, just don't have all this time to continue to be below 500, be okay in some games, then be really bad. Time is running out because of Brian Daboll, Joe Shane. They are not on the hot seat, I don't want to say, but they are sort of being looked at now as, where do we go? How do we get better at this point and not just stay the same? That all has to take into account in this decision, and the draft will clear up a lot of that, where they feel, how they feel about Daniel Jones, if they're going to move on this year with him. They sound like they will, but, you know, actions speak louder than words, so we're just going to have to wait to see what the Giants do in the draft. Just a little bit over a week now, 8 days exactly, until the first round of the NFL draft. But as we move on with this show, we have a lot more to talk about. After the break, I'm going to get into the Cowboys once again, specifically Stephen Jones. He appeared on a radio show yesterday talking about their quiet offseason. He gave some reasons, and he also went on a little bit further on how they're looking to fix their offensive line after a couple of very important departures in free agency. So stick around for all of that. We're just getting started today on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on to the second segment, which again revolves around the Dallas Cowboys, Stephen Jones. Everyone knows about all the comments that were made already from Jerry Jones on the Cowboys this season, crucial season, everybody knows that, but everybody just runs with the all-in comments, what that's all about, how up to this point the Cowboys really haven't lived up to that at all in just terms of free agency. In everyone's mind, once they heard that, they felt that they got a little excited. They felt that the Cowboys could make a run at this thing, if you would go as far as saying that, with Jerry Jones saying that they're all in. They expected signings. They expected potentially extensions for some of their biggest players. But up till now, we haven't seen any of that, and people are looking for answers. The fans want answers. What can they expect out of this? I'm sure they're hearing a lot of negative stuff and a lot of things that fans of the Cowboys don't want to hear when it comes to their team and being contenders. You have to re-sign CeeDee. Dak's on his last year. Michael Parsons is down the road even further. You had a lot of departures, so what are you going to do about that? Are they just going to continue to sit still? Well, today, or actually a few days ago now, at the time of streaming this, they signed Royce Freeman to add to that running back room. So that's at least something that they've taken action to add to that running back room. But it is reported that they are still expected to draft a running back at some point in the draft. So there's that. And Stephen Jones actually came out again yesterday on the 105.3 The Fan radio station show. And they asked him about it, any updates on the offseason and how it's going. And he just stated clearly, to back up Jerry Jones, everybody has their own definition of what that means, but I've never not known us to be all in. Points to the team spending on the roster year over year, as he put it, and he said that shows that they've been all in their eyes for the last few years. Just because, like he said, that should always be the mentality, basically, is what he's saying. In his estimation, the team's always all in. So for fans to think any different this year, I don't know. It's a bit different. The way he said it, being all in, it's a bit confusing, honestly, trying to see what that means. They're all in every year, but yeah, they've made other signings in the past, but this year it's just different because they have so many contract situations to work out. They've lost more people this offseason than they have in the past. Jerry Jones saying that they're all in now fit because of all those different aspects of this offseason that we haven't seen in the past. So for Stephen Jones now to say that they've always been all in, he can believe that, but the actions show differently because they haven't reacted or responded in the way that everybody feels that all in really means. You can only really spin that a certain amount of times before you end up landing in the same spot. I don't know how many other ways all in can mean to certain people, but Stephen Jones says that they're always all in. They're always spending year after year on their roster. So not to say that he's content, but that's his sort of pushback on everyone coming back and calling them out on the all-in comments and moving and saying more on that. He says that he and everybody in the organization supports being all in. Everybody thinks they're already all in, but he did acknowledge that this offseason that they have lost a lot of people and they haven't spent as much as they have in the past, but that is in an effort to try and re-sign those big players that they have on their team. Dak, CeeDee, Micah, all have factored into them not spending as much money as they have usually at this point in the offseason in the past. Those three are big components of that, and he broke it down in this way. He said, we spend max money year in and year out. All 32 can only spend the same amount of money over a 5-year stretch. When we're all said and done, we max out over the years our salary cap each and every year. We will have done that. What comes with having a good roster, which we do, we're also looking towards signing our guys. It doesn't mean it happens overnight, but when you're wanting to sign players like Dak and Micah and CeeDee, then certainly you have to hold money back if you want to have a realistic chance of signing those guys. It is a bit more specific than we've heard Stephen Jones say before, admitting that it's not a bad thing. He didn't point it out in a bad thing. He didn't say it like it's a burden. I'm sure he didn't want it to come out that way, but some people I'm sure will think of it that way as an excuse right now for them to not be as active in free agency. But then again, they decided, just like they decided in the past, to spend all this money on other free agents, on trying to get better. That was their decision when they also could have saved money before in the past if they decided to do so. Save money earlier on instead of waiting almost till the last minute with these deals. They could have decided to extend CeeDee last year, extend Dak maybe a year or two ago when he was eligible, and that would have created more wiggle room in the salary cap space that they have. But now, since they're waiting till the last minute and their team has lost more people, of course they can't predict that, but it's the reality. They've lost more people now. Now they're sort of scrambling to try and gather all this money last minute to try and re-sign their best named players, when they could have been prepared for all of this before if they were proactive with it and extended at least CeeDee Lamb last year before he had a massive year, and now he's going to want more money. So that gamble of waiting till now to try and do it has not panned out for the Cowboys, because CeeDee balled out. They still didn't get any better, and they lost a bunch of players. So what all could have gone bad, or sort of has gone bad for the Cowboys, but it's not all terrible. I don't want to paint it in that way just because they still have the option to do that. I'm sure they see options where they can keep all three of them, but then at that point, when I'm sure they want to keep all three, at that point I'm sure you have to ask the question, with all this spending and trying to re-sign both of them, it becomes a case of having quantity over quality in a football team on a roster. Having three players that are at the top of their position group taking up all the money, and then everybody else on the roster, all the other positions, are average or below average just because they're on low salaries, because all the money went right up to the top to those three players. Do you use that? Do you go that way? Or do you have to, unfortunately, sacrifice one of them and keep as many as you can, one or two of them, get more money, and then be a little bit more balanced, not have such a disparity with the top paid, top talented guys on your roster, and then everybody else is just way below? You try and bring it as even as possible. I think that's probably what I would do. Of course, the Cowboys, the fans, nobody would want to lose any of these three players, but honestly, reality speaking, trying to be as logical as I can with this, I think it would just be in their best interest to have to pull that Band-Aid off and have to realize that it might have to just come to losing one of them to build a competitive roster. In all honesty, and just in my mind, I don't see them being any better than they have been with all three of them staying, but the rest of their team is a little bit below average, not as good as it has been, specifically that offensive line, because that is a huge part of any team, not just the Cowboys' success. But in free agency, they lost their starting center, Tyler Biadasz, their starting left tackle, Tyron Smith, and they have to try and fill those holes, but where do they get the money? All right, free agency might not be an option because of the money, so you look at the draft. They sit at 24 right now. Who really can be drafted there that can be a day one starter? If you hit on one, that's great, but you still have another hole to fill out there. And where do you go from there? Well, Stephen Jones also talked about that, and he really said as an answer, neither of those options. He said that he doesn't see all the urgency from the Cowboys fans, doesn't really agree with the urgency in trying to use a first-round pick and trying to replace a offensive lineman through that way. He doesn't see it like that. He emphasized the trust in the younger players that they have on their roster. Younger players like Matt Waletzko, a fifth-round pick 2 years ago. He only played 4 games in the 2 seasons, but he is one of their younger offensive linemen. Stephen Jones also mentioned Asim Richards, a fifth-round pick just last year. Again, played mostly special teams, hasn't really had any game minutes, any game reps at all so far. And then you have others like Brock Hoffman, TJ Bass, who are names that Stephen Jones brought up. But all of these players, again, does he really have a lot of trust, this much trust, to throw them in there and expect similar results? That's unrealistic if he just wants to throw them out there and hope for the best. Their offensive line wouldn't be awful, but it would definitely be a big drop-off from what they've seen in the past, and then how that affects Dak, his protection, how it makes everybody else look, because if Dak's playing bad, constantly getting hit, it's not going to make CD look good. They have no running back already, and other than CD, they don't have that much. Jake Ferguson looked great, but again, you need a very good offensive line, which they had last year. Just across the board, all 5 positions looked solid, and Jake Ferguson had a big year. CD obviously had a big year. Dak played great. So I think on top of the free agents, the offensive line has to be a crucial piece to this whole thing, or else nothing's really going to happen. I think it'll all just fall apart at that point. And now you get to a point where in this offseason, yeah, you want to re-sign everybody. That's what Stephen Jones says. But it seems like CD could be the first one, at least up in those negotiation process, at least just because he hasn't shown up so far to the spring workouts. The first day was on Monday. We're now on Wednesday, and he's not there. So he hasn't shown up. Are you going to call it a holdout right now, not being there for this part? Probably not officially, but he seems to be trying to apply a bit of pressure there by not showing up at this point. We have to see how it develops going forward, if this actually turns out into an official holdout. But I think it's genius. It's a smart move by CeeDee Lamb because he obviously sees that they have low money in their salary cap. They have to try and re-sign one of them. I'm sure they'd love to, and by doing this, he's applying a little bit of pressure there. They have more time with Micah, so he's not really in contention for that. It's just really between CeeDee and Dak to try and re-sign right now. It could just come down to really, do they pick CeeDee or do they pick Dak? I'm sure CeeDee wants to stay around the Cowboys, so he's applying this pressure, this method to try and get an extension done with him sooner rather than later. And we're going to see how it all ends out. That's where it all stands right now. No real movements as of yet, but Stephen Jones has provided at least a reason that most people have come to the conclusion of already, that they are trying to save up for all these big-name players, but is it going to be a case of too little, too late for at least one of them? If it's smart to get rid of one of them to try and build up the rest of your roster, crucial decisions are coming for the Cowboys down the line. Starting next week with the NFL Draft, it'll paint a clearer picture of where they're going. But in the meantime, we're going to move on with the rest of the show. 2 more stories coming up on today's episode. We're going to talk about the Packers and what they're going to do in the first 3 rounds with 5 picks that they've accumulated over these last few years with trades and stuff like that. We're going to see what their avenues are in that aspect, and then we're going to continue on with Deion Sanders and talking about more around his comments on an interview with Front Office Sports that he gave last week. We're going to diagnose that, dive deeper into that. More of that coming up after this break. Again, you're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Moving right along with today's episode, I mentioned before the break, we're going to talk about the Packers and what they do with a lot more picks than they, I'm sure, expected in the first 3 rounds and how they're going to maneuver around that. But one last time on the show, I will remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make on any of the segments, to use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, that you see on your screen or running across the ticker down below. Using that link makes it able for me to see your question pop up on air in my chat box. I can read your question on air and carry on the conversation that way, answer any questions or anything you guys want to say. I think it's better this way. It's more engaging, more conversational, and it's a big help on top of everything with this show and the rest of the shows on the network. So again, if you could use that tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, it would be greatly appreciated from all of us here at the network. But back to the Packers, back to what they do with 5 picks in the NFL draft, or at least in the first 3 rounds. I mentioned before, leading up to this, writing all this information down, the Packers surprised everyone last year with how well they performed with an extremely young team last year in the playoffs. I think they were actually the youngest team officially in all of the playoffs. They're still that right now. Most of their significant pieces are 25 or not that much older, 26. They are still the youngest team, like I mentioned. They only have one player over 30, and that's Preston Smith, who is 31 years old. And they can get even younger, which is the crazy part, because they have 11 picks in total, and 3 of their own picks in the first 3 rounds are their own. Number 25 in the first round, then 58 and 88 on day 2, plus they have the second-round pick from the New York Jets in that trade with Aaron Rodgers at 41, and they have the Bills' third-round pick as well at 91. All inside the top 100, obviously, all in the first 3 rounds. And that's a lot of draft capital to work with. If you're coming off a major year last year with the Packers, you want to build on that. Obviously, you were pleasantly surprised with Jordan Love and how exceptional he played, how well all the young receivers stepped up. Of course, the offensive line played great. Aaron Jones balled out once he came back from injury and into the playoffs. Unfortunately, that inexperience, that young team that we saw couldn't get it done in some of the crucial moments against the 49ers. But again, that just comes with experience. It was their first time all being there together. They surprised everyone with that win in Dallas. That was, I'm sure, electrifying for them, exciting for a young team. But with a more seasoned team like the 49ers, it comes a bit differently. You're going to have to play all 60 minutes, and they didn't play them all to their best. They had a chance, I'm sure. It was definitely close, but that just comes with experience. I expect them to be successful this coming year. I think they're a dark horse in that NFC, if you would still call them that. I think they've really pronounced to everyone that they've arrived, but in many people's eyes, they're a dark horse team, and I'm picking with them. I'm sticking with them as a sneaky pick in this year to surprise even more people in the NFC. But to do that, it all starts with the draft. Like I mentioned, they have an abundance of these picks, so what do they do with it? No Packers general manager, now that they have Brian Gutekunst. No Packers general manager in the past has made 5 selections in the top 100 in 18 years. So this is really new territory for their general manager. A lot of people, some sources have said that could this be an avenue now to trade up into the top 10? That has never been done, or he, specifically Gutekunst, hasn't really done that before, and he answered that. They asked him about it. Now this week again, with spring practices going on, you have more media there in the building, and they asked him about the possibility of moving up in the top 10 with all of these picks, to which he said, I think it's very expensive to do that. From what you have to give up to go from where we're at right now, you're giving up a lot. So unless it's a quarterback or a rare player, I think you have to be careful with that scenario. And on top of, being risky, realistically, I just don't think they need it, because it's not like this roster needs a lot of offensive players, a lot of defensive players. They have already established a lot of their starters. Maybe you could go safety, but they've already addressed that with Xavier McKinney. Could you get him a partner back there? Yeah, that would be great. You could look to offensive line, maybe. Now that David Bakhtiari moved on. Yeah, he wasn't playing as the season went on, and he didn't really play as much as he used to because of those injuries, and because it just wasn't he wasn't just a player, he was in the past. So you lose him free agency, but Rasheed Walker filled in for him, and he honestly didn't do bad. I was fairly impressed with their offensive line in the playoffs. That didn't look like a glaring need. So where do you really look to try and improve, to have to move into the top 10? I don't see it. I see it like Brian Gutekunst, that it isn't a necessity right now, and you have to be careful about it, like he put it, but I would almost 90% rule it out because of all the reasons that I mentioned, and on what now he can do with 11 picks if you're not going to trade up that drastically. It is a bit daunting to see all these options now with these picks. Gutekunst has never had 18 or made 8 picks in this part of the draft. He has only had 8 first-round picks with Green Bay, and 7 of them have been defensive players. So could that be a tell on where we could go, where we could look at with all these selections? The only exception to that one time that he didn't pick a defensive player was Jordan Love. And talk about hitting it on the head. The one time you don't go defense, you find your franchise quarterback. So lucky for them, lucky for the Packers, they hit on that. And defense, again, you could go that way. You could find a linebacker, a safety like I mentioned, but I don't think that's a massive need. Corner could be something you look into with trying to find somebody to line up alongside Jair Alexander. They sit at 25 right now in the first round, and that's pretty well suited to find a corner, a probably not linebacker if they're going to go defense, which history says that they're probably going to do that, because I don't see a lot of first-round talent in the first draft at that position. From all the mock drafts, from all the analysts, it usually seems like the linebackers in this year's class are being pushed at least at the earliest to the second round. So I've ruled that out already. To me, the obvious choice, the one that makes the most sense, is trying to find a safety or a defensive back in the first round. And oddly enough, again, Brian Gutekunst has drafted 3 secondary players, all in the first round in the past, that he's had the job with the Green Bay Packers. Jair Alexander in 2018 as the 18th overall pick. He drafted Eric Stokes in 2021 at pick 29. And most recently, he drafted Darnell Savage in 2019 at pick 21. So secondary is a very popular pick for him. they still need some secondary help, and that's why you see players like Cooper DeJean or Tyler Nubin start to make more and more sense, because not many teams in that area as well don't need a safety in the first round, don't really need a corner unless it's a number one. And there have been questions around Cooper DeJean because he's coming off of an injury. He had a separate pro day, so teams might be skeptical on him, causing him to fall. And the top of the list at corner right now sits as Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold most likely. So if teams aren't getting that, it seems like the feeling around the NFL is that Cooper DeJean could be in there. Of course, you have guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry as well. But Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold have done such a good job that I think they've elevated themselves to that higher part of the draft, and then everybody else can kind of just file in whenever teams need it. So it's not a drastic need where everybody else desperately needs one, where the Packers can just sit there and have a choice of going with one of them. Those are starting to make more sense. Offensive linemen, I mentioned before, could be an option, but Gutekunst has never really drafted offense in the first round, and he has never actually, in fact, drafted an offensive lineman in the first round. In his 8 drafts that he's had, not one of those picks has been for the offensive line, and it has worked out for him. He came into a good situation where he had good offensive linemen and hasn't really needed to draft one that high, and all the other picks that he has gone offensive line have worked out for him. You look at Elton Jenkins, drafted him in 2019 in the second round. He's now a starter for them. Josh Myers is a starter for them. They're starting safety. He was picked in the second round as well in 2021. So good for him, good scouting, good player evaluation to find these gems in the later rounds, to not use a first-round pick on offensive line. And again, at 25, with the offensive linemen, I believe they're going to start to go at 11 or 12, probably the earliest, the way it all seems to be breaking down with the Raiders, the Broncos all there, the Saints right after them as well. All of them couldn't go wrong with drafting an offensive lineman, so I think the major run is going to start right there, where the Packers, to say that they're going to gamble on one, I don't want to really put that label on it because it could work out for them, but the best offensive lineman to me, just based on all the scouting and all the grades and stuff like that that have come out, are starting to go in the 12 to 17 range, I would say. So the Packers, I think, could wait on that, which is why, again, it just locks down the feeling that I'm getting with them at 25 to go secondary, bring more experience to that part of the field because there is a lot of communication there. Bring in another voice in there to try and lock it down, I think would make the most sense. But on top of the draft and what they could do with this pick, I would love to see them get a bit more experience, specifically at the wide receiver position, because all the wide receivers, they don't have one that's older than 24 years old. Jaden Reed is 23, Romeo Dobbs and Watson are 24, and then Dontavion Wicks is 22 years old. Using some of those picks or signing one veteran wide receiver could be an avenue for them to explore potentially, maybe using those picks in a trade for somebody that isn't a star wide receiver. You could use some of those picks to draft a second, a third wide receiver for this team. I think that would go a long way in helping them be a more reliable option for Jordan Love. And the offensive line class, to just wrap this all up, is very deep. It's one of the deepest positions, not only this year's draft, but that has come out in recent years. So I think waiting on that, finding one late in the rounds, it has worked out for you already. I don't see why this year would be any different now that this draft class, this group, is one of the deepest it has been in recent years. I think probably for me, Tyler Nubin would probably be the best pick because he is a great talent. He is ranked as the number one safety on a lot of people's boards. It makes sense for them to fill in that hole and have a great partnership there with Xavier McKinney and Tyler Nubin. Could also entertain a move back with Washington or the Buffalo Bills if they see one of them is desperately trying to move up. But I've talked about both of those teams before. More so the Bills. I've talked about them trying to move up. I don't think it makes sense for them. I don't expect them to at this point. So picking at 25, keeping those 5 picks, I think will fill out this roster more for the Packers, and good for them that they don't have to do too much on that. In my estimation, they could draft, fill out the roster, and continue to develop this young team. It's an exciting time to be a Packers fan, and like I mentioned before, I have high hopes for them. I love what I saw out of Jordan Love. I think they're going to be a sneaky good team this year in 2024. In saying that, it allows me to move on. We're going to go to a quick break just here in a few seconds, and on the other side, we're going to go further into Deion. I mentioned yesterday those 6 teams that he pointed out for Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. Well, now he kind of gives a reason why some players, generational type of players, might pull an Eli Manning and tell teams that, hey, I don't want to be drafted here, I want to go here. He gives a reasoning for that. Find out what that is after the break in just a few seconds. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me in this last segment of the show. Talking again, wrapping this show up with Deion Sanders. I closed out yesterday's episode talking about Deion, and now I bring him up again because there is a lot of talk around the draft now. Obviously, we're getting closer and closer, and with the draft, there is a lot of good things. Players obviously get drafted, fulfill their dreams, all that good stuff, but there is a lot of negative, unheard of, untalked about things that really just happen, and teams don't bring it up. People don't bring it up as to why this just randomly happens. What I'm referring to is sometimes you see players have high draft grades, a lot of positive around them, and then you hear a story, a potential rumor, some hearsay around them about their life off the field, having some issues off the field, and it all paints them in a negative way, and then their draft stock just drops, and a lot of people are left wondering, oh, why are they sliding so much? Why did they suddenly drop? It could be because some of these rumors come out that hurt not only their draft stock, but if they're severe enough, it could hurt them just personal-wise. Then people are commenting on their character, what they're like off the field, and they're questioning all of that, and it gets all a bit too personal at times when everything seemed to be going good. Something comes out and it all just crumbles in just a minute, and they're thrown into a loop. A lot of uncertainty comes with it, and it's pretty nerve-wracking, honestly, just to think about being in this position as a draft prospect. You're about to realize your dream, and then something like this happens. It's a very bad situation to be in, but it happens, and Deion, of all people, Deion Sanders, backs up these actions that take place, and he talked about it yesterday. Deion came forward with more to say on Travis Hunter and his son Shedeur Sanders in regards to them and where they're going to fall in the draft. He mentioned the specific teams that I talked about yesterday, but last week in an interview with Front Office Sports, he explained his reasonings for being so selective and being so outspoken with this, with generational type of players that he believes that he has and has coached. He said that I played in the league for 14 years, and I was on television with NFL Network and CBS for another 20 years. Therefore, I kind of know which teams there are in the NFL that are not serious about winning, and why would you want your players or your children even to go to places that are not set on winning? Saying that, it makes sense. You hear that, you have to remember Deion, not only, like he mentioned, is a coach, the way you see these videos play out with his coaches and him talking to them and stuff like that, he seems very close to them. He seems like he wants truly the best in them. So taking that into account, hearing him talk, plus he is a dad, he is coaching his son. He wants them naturally to go into the best situation, and him having this experience in the NFL, all these connections in the NFL still, I'm sure hearing what goes on with the draft, working on the draft as well, I'm sure he knows for sure better than most people how the draft works out and how these teams set their draft boards, how they raise people's stocks, and how also they deteriorate people's stocks as well. And it makes sense. He wants the best for their players, so he is trying to be selective. It rubs people the wrong way, but that's just how he feels about it. And not only that, he went on to say that teams usually dictate where players fall through good methods and through bad methods. Good methods you see, as an example, just this year, Jim Harbaugh coached J.J. McCarthy. Now he's going into the NFL. Talks glowingly about J.J. McCarthy, and that on top of the pro day and a lot of what J.J. McCarthy has shown just raise his draft stock. But what Jim Harbaugh has said about him, that can't be lost in all of this process. That has certainly helped sway how certain people view J.J. McCarthy. If Jim Harbaugh is saying he's great, one of the best quarterbacks he's seen in college, there has to be some truth to that because he is Jim Harbaugh. He has to know what he's talking about, right? And in that, with generational talents like Eli himself, Deion Sanders, John Elway, Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, he believes that what they're doing, being outspoken and deciding where they want to go, is just doing the same thing that these NFL teams are doing, essentially in controlling where a lot of these players go with some of the news that comes out. In the quote in Front Office Sports, he referenced a lot of this, and he broke it down in the way he sees it by saying, you have guys that are slated to go and slotted to go at this number pick. Randomly, something comes out that they flunked a drug test, or they have this type of injury, or they were seen with this, and wildly, their draft just drops later in the round or even into the next round. And in saying that, he continues on. How does that happen? How does that mysteriously come out right before the draft? So isn't that the same thing? That's even more harsh than obviously referencing them. It's even more harsh than them just simply saying they don't want to be drafted here or here. Hurting these draft player stocks is even more harsh in his mind and his way of saying it. Then the conversation continues, and it usually, or not usually, it just concludes with, so that's done every year. The reason I know that is because I've worked the draft, I think, for about 10 to 12 years straight. I know that to be true. NFL teams releasing rumors, starting rumors, releasing personal news. He claims it to be true. He's worked, played in the NFL for decades, and he claims that to be true. So taking all of that, how do you analyze that? What do you think about that? NFL teams doing that, and now Deion Sanders as a counter with generational type of players just going back at it, essentially doing the same thing and saying, no, I want to be drafted here, because at the end of the day, with these players, and I want to make sure I say it's the generational type of players. I've talked about this before, how college is sort of shifting into this method now, this mold of players coming in off of NIL and being more outspoken, having more responsibility, so them taking charge more. I want to make sure it is just limited, at least for now, for these generational type of players, because most of these players are more likely to benefit from pulling an Eli Manning. These generational type of players, if they're good enough, they're going to get drafted, right? These general managers, these teams are going to draft them even if they come with baggage, if they come with saying they don't want to be drafted here or there, or they want this or that. Generational players, rare players, unique, special players usually just get drafted. So saying things like this, pulling an Eli, wouldn't hurt them compared to everybody else. If everyone just starts doing it, a lot of players are going to be undrafted, and they're going to hurt their own draft stock. So for now, it is just the special type of players that are able to do this, and they're usually the ones to benefit more from doing this because it usually turns out in them ending up in the place they want to go. And with that being said, the rumors of Deion Sanders referencing can be seen as worse for a kid saying that he doesn't want to go to a certain team because they're questioning their personal side, and that's really where the issue lies. A lot of these rumors, stories that break right before the draft usually concern players and their personal side of things. Just as examples, looking back on the years, Laramie Tunsil, probably the most famous one. I shouldn't think it's that funny because it was pretty serious in the moment, but Laramie Tunsil, I'm sure everyone's seen it, the video of him smoking with the mask and everything like that, right before he was about to be picked, and then that just drops randomly. It is released out there, and then he falls. He proceeds to fall in the draft, and then as another example, you look at Dak Prescott. He was arrested for a DUI, and then it was determined that all the charges were dropped and that he wasn't found guilty really for that. But it comes out, you hear DUI, Dak Prescott, quarterback, people are going to think a certain thing about him, so he's going to drop. He was drafted in the 4th round when he could have potentially been drafted earlier. You hear something like this come out right before the draft, and it ultimately just ends up hurting them on the personal side of things. Then teams have questions, and they're not sure they're ready to risk it all on this potential red flag that they see pop up out of nowhere, blindsides them, so then they have to look a different direction. Even if it's true or not, it does end up hurting the players, and teams deserve to know that sort of thing. I know that. But dropping it suddenly leading up to the draft or on draft day right before they're going to get drafted, that's where the issue lies. And I'm sure Deion would probably say the same thing. It's really mostly about the timing. I'm sure teams definitely deserve to know these sort of things because they are investing a lot in these players. If they're good, they're going to invest a lot of money in these players, so they have to know everything. If there's a potential danger, something that could get them in trouble, if there's a habit, a behavior that they're not a fan of, they should know that to get a good feeling of what this player's like. That all makes sense, but dropping it so suddenly, that's where the issue lies. And maybe with a lot of these personal stories and reports that come out, maybe it was already discussed between teams and this player. If he had a bad incident, a lapse of judgment once in his career that caused him to do a bad thing, take a bad decision somewhere, maybe that was already discussed between the player and the team privately. But by releasing it again suddenly, now everybody knows and everybody starts making assumptions, and it gets just to be too overwhelming for the player, for the teams, to have everybody just ask them about the situation now. And it takes away from the kind of player that they are, the on-the-field thing, which ultimately matters the most with drafting a player, but it could be discussed privately. So that's another thing I think a lot of people don't consider. This could have already been arranged with the player and the team, but with everybody having an opinion, putting it out there for everyone to see, people are going to say negative things, and that carries on into a worse situation. And overall, with this whole situation with Deion, yeah, it happens, and you don't want it to happen, but it's not really acknowledged too much around the NFL that, oh, this happened because of this. No team is going to come out and say, oh, we didn't draft him because he had a DUI once or he was seen with this person once. That's why we're not drafting them. It's going to look bad, but it still happens, and that's where Deion really just wraps this all up with, in a way, saying if they're allowed to do this sort of thing, be this harsh, potentially harming to these players, at least the rare, very special players should have the ability to say, all right, well, this is my career, this is my livelihood, I want to succeed as much as I can in the league. They should be able to decide what teams fit them best. Of course, you don't want to go overblown and think, oh, I don't want to be drafted first overall to one of these worse off teams. I want to go in the late 20s to one of the top teams and have all the success. It's not going to happen. That's never going to be the situation. That's unrealistic. But Deion, I'm sure, with everything that he said, I'm sure feels that it is fair for these special players to determine where they want to go in the range of where they're projected to go anyway. I'm sure it's not going to go much more than that, but that is an interesting take from Deion. I never really thought of it that way, but once I saw his comments and decided what he sort of meant by it, I'm not going to advocate for it, for everybody doing it. I think it's very rare for players, even any player, to do it. If any player is going to do it, it's going to be those Caleb Williams, the Peyton Mannings, the maybe Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, those type of players that can do it, at least for now. I can see why they would want to do it, but that's where it stands right now. That's all until next year's draft. He's saying Travis and Shedeur are going to do that. We're going to have to see. Luckily, none of that stuff is happening in this year's draft with Caleb, just because he is going to the Bears. Everybody knows it, but it is definitely an interesting debate to have if it's fair for players to do this because teams do it. Is there a drop-off in where people fall off on which side is right or wrong? I think it's an interesting topic to come and talk about, discuss. If you guys have an opinion on it, who's in the right, do you agree with Deion or not? Leave it in the comments below at the conclusion of this video. I would love to know what you guys think on that topic because I truly thought it was pretty interesting and fascinating how Deion broke it down. But in saying that, in wrapping that all up, that'll do it for me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to say a huge thank you to you guys for tuning in and listening to today's episode. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show as well, on top of following us on all the social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube shorts that are posted on there. Full recorded live shows like this one are all logged and recorded on both of those channels, as well as individual segment videos. If you don't want to watch a whole show, or if you missed a certain segment, want to go back and catch up on it, they're all on there on both channels. Make sure to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys again for joining me, and I will see you guys all back here tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.